I want to talk about Romans chapter 2, verse 28 through chapter 3, verse 8. I want to begin by focusing on Romans verse 2, 28 through 29. I'll read this right here. A person is not a Jew who is one only outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. End quote. Here's a point that his point here is that you are not Jewish just by having external signs. External signs are fine and good, but the far more important thing is what's going on the inside. So a Jew is circumcised. Fine, good. But does he love God? Is he cruel and unjust to the weak and the poor? Or you have a person who gives the appearance of being pious or holy or godly, someone who intentionally cultivates and carefully curates a very public image of goodness or piety or holiness as a good and respectable Christian, but only when other people are watching and only when there's some advantage to the reputation of or some kind of self-interest. But privately, they're hypocrites. They don't really care much for God or the things of God. All that piety is just for show. Uh, Paul is telling us that the inside is far more important than the outside. In fact, if the inside is not genuine, then the value of the outside is completely negated. It counts for nothing. Everything you do outside is totally worthless in the eyes of God if the motives are not free, if your heart's not transformed. Now, having heard that, if you're like me, your response is, yawn, yeah, tell me something I don't know. This is all true, but is it profound? Didn't we all learn this in first grade? Isn't something we learned all the time in Sunday school, elementary school? You know, that phrase, don't judge a book by its cover. We've all known that. Every kid knows that. Well, yes, it is true, and it does seem kind of elementary. And I assume there's some consensus among all of us that this is kind of a no-brainer. Nothing new to learn here. But not so fast. Do we really believe this? And do we really live like this? Let me ask you a question. Think of the most private and shameful sin that you have ever committed, either past or present, or more than just one. Why just stop at one? Think of all the many private sins that are dark and deep and we're ashamed of. And I want you to imagine that you can put that private and shameful thing, that sin, in a black magical box. Now, because it's in this little black magical black box, it's like the sin does not exist. It's like it never happened. And most importantly, no one can ever know that it exists provided it stay in this magical black box, including God. Okay, it's like it's been mind erased from God and everyone else. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. You either have to reveal the contents of this black box to the world, but it's hidden from God, or the alternative, God will know the contents of your black box, but no human being in the world will ever know the contents of this black box of shame. Take a moment. What would you choose? I don't need a moment. I know what I'm going to choose. I'm letting God know. Well, duh, for many reasons. Because God's going to forgive me. I know that. And people, on the other hand, can be merciless and vindictive. They may never forgive me. In fact, they may take revenge on me and punish me for if they find out what's in that little black box of shame. I mean, if people really knew how bad I really am, that'd be really scary. There'd be severe consequences on my life. I'd be ashamed to go in public. I don't know. Are you like me? I'm working on the assumption that you are like me, and since this is a recorded video, I can't ask you for a response. If you are like me, okay, well, what does that say about us? We would reveal our sins to God and hide it from the world. That would be our first choice. I think what it means is that we care more about what people think about us than what God thinks about us. Or we're more afraid of being rejected by people than we are about being rejected, than we fear being rejected by God. We fear the judgment of people more than we fear the judgment of God. We crave the approval of people more than we crave the approval of God. Or maybe we care more about what people think of us than what God thinks of us. Just something to think about. So maybe this lesson that the inside is more important than the outside. We all know that to be true, but maybe it's not that simple. Maybe it's not that elementary. I want to shift gears for a minute, and it's related for the rest of the verses in this passage and what I just talked about. We have this God who will always forgive us no matter how bad our sins are. And our God will always love us or love you no matter what. And you cannot earn God's approval or love by what you do. The people in our lives, friends and acquaintances, family, even the best ones, they have limits. They're not God. They may not always love and forgive you. There's a limit. And so when it comes to people in our lives, we got to be careful. Okay, there's a limit to what they'll tolerate from us. I think the problem is, or it's not really a problem, but it's a thing. Because of what God has promised us and because of who God is, I think we tend to be less careful with God. Now, I'm not saying it's right. I just think that's what we do because he promises forgiveness and love. And we tend to take him for granted. We shouldn't, but I think we tend to. It's human nature. I know I do. And unlike we are with our friends and acquaintances, human beings, when it comes to God, we become careless, or we veer towards carelessness. We don't walk on eggshells around God because you don't have to, and we shouldn't. But I wonder if we start taking his forgiveness for granted. And so Paul writes later in Romans 6, "Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. How shall we, that we are dead to sin and live no longer therein?" It's this claim that Paul's talking about. He's making fun of other people. This is ridiculous, of course. He then goes on to say, the argument seems to be, since God's glorified by forgiving me of my sins, maybe I ought to sin more and sin big. Because the more I sin, the more God forgives and the more God's glorified. That's a really stupid idea. Who really thinks that? No one really thinks that, honestly, seriously. Except, I wonder to what extent we kind of live that way. Or we're tempted to live that way. We sin because we take God for granted. Just something to think about.